Wim Wiewel, who will provide our annual Convocation address. Wim?
Thank you, Roy. In the past 2 years that I've been here, I've always known Roy to be a snappy dresser, and again today he looks very elegant. But if any of you haven't seen it, you should go on the university website and look at the picture that accompanies the story about our visit to Pendleton, and you will see Roy fully decked out in Western wear, and it's definitely a picture worth seeing. This summer, I had the pleasure, along with Marvin Kaiser, to be guided by Ken Ames, whom we honored here today, on a visit to the dig, the excavation that he and his colleagues have been working on the site of what's called Cathapodal, a Chinook Native American settlement right along the Columbia River, just a little bit north and east of here. That was actually visited by Lewis and Clark in 1806. And we first went to a part of the park there, the state park that's there, where there's actually a rebuild or reconstruction of the traditional plank house or longhouse, which is it can vary from about 30 to 60 feet long, maybe about 30 feet wide, quite high. It has a big open fire pit in the middle, and families would live there. It was also a ceremonial place. So we spent a little time there, but I was anxious to see the actual dig, so I asked Ken, come on, let's go see the dig. So we got in his four-wheel drive vehicle and had to sort of drive through a little industrial area, and then it became a bit of a dirt road, and then it became more just of a grassy kind of track. And at a certain point, there was a big branch that was across the track, so the three of us had to get out of the car and sort of start pushing and pulling to get this branch out of the way. At one point it broke off, which made Marvin topple backwards rather unceremoniously into the ditch. Fortunately, the ditch was dry, so with dignity only slightly harmed, we got back into the four-wheel drive. And at a certain point, Ken started saying, well, the trail must be off here somewhere. Well, all we could see was a lot of undergrowth, a dense growth of vines and brambles and blackberries and whatnot. At a certain point, he stops the car, and he says, well, it must be right here. Well, we stepped over the barbed wire that was there, just barely made that. And then I want you to imagine this vision of Ken with his machete in the lead, followed by Marvin, and followed by me. I don't know whether you want to think Three Musketeers or Three Stooges, but it's one or the other. So Ken is chopping away at this undergrowth and brush. We're being eaten by about 1 billion mosquitoes. And then we do that for what seems interminably, but only was about 5 minutes probably. And then at a certain point, Ken says, here it is. And I look around, and all of this is a bit of a clearing, still lots of blackberries, still billions of mosquitoes. And he says, yes, this is where it was. This is where we dug, but now, of course, we've covered it all up again. So, he starts telling me about, look, what we did digging, and then we found these holes in the ground where we could see the black residue, which told us that there must have been posts there. And we found some arrow points and some other shards and about 1 billion fish bones. And based on that, Ken and his colleagues were able to create this whole picture of a civilization that existed there, not even all that long ago. And, all I could see were the brambles and the mosquitoes. And it sort of made me think that, well, there must be a metaphor in here somewhere. And I started thinking about how, indeed, this is not so different from the enterprise that we are engaged in. That, we do all this cutting away of the underbrush, and we do all this very small, painstaking work, and we believe that in the end, it all does add up to something grander than that. When we see those students on graduation walking along on the stage, they don't really look that different from the way they looked when they came in. But we believe that we have created educated men and women, that we have actually made them into something other than what they were. We've created something even though we can't see it. And indeed, similarly, for the whole university as a whole, sure, we can see the buildings, but we believe that what we do every day is really creating something much grander than that, an intellectual, civic, economic, cultural edifice, which is a collective enterprise, but which sometimes we can only see in our mind's eye. Just like that day, I could only rely on my mind's eye to see this plank house, a longhouse, which to Ken, of course, was just as real as anything. And I thank you for that experience and reminding me of how we go about building this structure that we call the university. I want to tell you today about some of the main things that I see going on in this year to come as we engage jointly in the effort of building this university. You have found on your seats, but you don't need to look at it now, the summary of the main goals that we have for the year, again organized by the 5 themes. And indeed, in the back of the hall, the tables there, you will find a full version of that with 83 individual actions, followed by about 85 or so individual outcomes. We're using that to hold ourselves accountable. But I did not want to be too tedious and go through all of that. So I will just talk a little bit about the main issues that I think are facing us and that we will be dealing with. The first one of those, I think we have to start with the state's fiscal condition, driven, of course, by the economic condition of the country as a whole and the state. As you know, unemployment is stubbornly fixed in Oregon at about 10.6%. Our beloved Tom Patowski, our own economics professor, who is making these forecasts for the state, doesn't see a lot of change in that. That means that we will continue to see cutbacks. So far, during this biennium, out of our $132 million state budget for the biennium, for the 2 years together, we've had to give back about $11.5 million already. And most of that, of course, has come in the second half of the biennium. Now, fortunately, we've been able to do most of that out of the reserves that we created because we knew that there was going to be tough times ahead. So we haven't had to go back to the individual colleges and units to make more cuts. We hope that there will not be too many more of these between now and June 30th. However, we've already been told that for the next biennium, that starts July 1, 2011, we need to be prepared for cuts anywhere between 15 to 25% in the state budget. So we will again be working on that. Now, we are looking at these issues in the context of the possibility of organizational change in the Oregon University system, and I think it is in part driven by these fiscal issues that is even more urgent. Even though restructuring will not by itself give us more money, it will save a little bit of money. It will make us more nimble, more flexible, and frankly more able to adjust to what we are faced with. You may recall that the governor had appointed a reset committee which made certain recommendations in June. Then the Oregon University System Board adopted a set of principles that primarily focused on the idea of how can we recreate the Oregon University system and have it stop being a state agency just like the Department of Corrections or the Department of Motor Vehicles. How can we make it more independent? And the metaphor that was used to have it be like a statewide community college district, although it would be without taxation powers and without an elected board. It would still be an appointed board. That would make it free from a lot of the contributions that the system now has to make to places like the Department of Administrative Services, the maintenance of the Capitol, Department of Justice, all kinds of centralized costs that really would reduce cost. And it would allow us to negotiate better deals on purchases, on benefits, on risk management insurance, all those things. Now, we've had a lot of discussions about these last year in the 7 committees that we had. You know, there are, of course, a lot of anxieties about this, a lot of worries about this, and who knows where it will ultimately come down in the legislature. Right now, there is a higher ed work group that has been appointed by the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate, who are, in fact, drafting the specific legislation that will come from legislators themselves to bring it forward into the next session. One important sideline that will get a fair amount of publicity over time is that the University of Oregon is planning to introduce its own legislation, which would immediately give the University of Oregon its own governing board and take it out of the Oregon University system entirely, just have the Oregon University system remain as a coordinating system. Along with that, it would create a new finance model where the state would issue bonds that they would give to the University of Oregon, they would match that with private funding, and then they would essentially live on that endowment going forward rather than on the annual state contribution. These competing proposals or complementary proposals, depending on how you look at it, create a very interesting climate in the legislature. I personally believe that it is very important for Portland State University to continue to collaborate very closely with our other institutions, to legislatively work very closely with the Oregon University system on their proposal, but also to maximize the potential option in the future of having our own governance board, especially if the University of Oregon gets its own governance board. I think we would be in a disadvantageous position if we did not also have that. So we're in the midst of those debates right now. You'll be reading and hearing more about it, and it won't be resolved till sometime in the legislature next year. And who knows, knowing the legislation and political climate, it is not entirely impossible. Absolutely nothing will happen, of course. You know, we have to bear that in mind too. I personally think that something will happen, but no doubt it won't be as much as we would like. Now, against this background of restructuring then, and Roy already alluded to this, it becomes even more important for us to really think about our own fiscal future and to really take hold of that. So we have established sort of a successor committee to the LTIFs. This is called the FFT, the Fiscal Futures Task Force. It's easier because nobody could ever remember LTIFs. Fiscal Futures Task Force, which is being co-chaired by Vice President Lindsay DeRoche and Roy, and has all the representation on it. I think the key challenge for that group will be to think about, given that we are so dependent on revenues that we generate from something other than the state general fund, whether it's tuition, self-support programs, research and the indirect cost, other sources of funding, how do we develop then a budget allocation model which both maximizes providing incentives appropriately, while also making sure that the funds are distributed in a way that continues to serve the collective mission of the university and not just only advantages those who may be in a position to maximize revenue. It's for any institution like a university that has purposes that are not related to making money, but that nevertheless has to meet a bottom line. It's always balancing those incentives with our overall goals and purposes. And I think the Fiscal Futures Task Force will be very helpful in helping us think that through. Of course, the other thing that as we think about greater levels of autonomy, whether it's within the context of the Oregon University system or even PSU alone, is that there will be greater emphasis on accountability. Indeed, this is one of the messages that I have carried to legislators. It's just tell us what the outcomes are that you want, and let us figure out how we get there. And I tell the board the same thing. Get away from telling us how to run our business. We know how to run our business. Just tell us the outcomes. Number of graduates, certain priority fields, stuff like that, but don't tell me exactly how I got to do it. Just recently in a round of cuts in the spring, we got questions from the Department of Administrative Services. Well, how many full-time faculty, how many part-time faculty, how many adjuncts are you planning to hire? I do not believe that the Department of Administrative Services is best suited to make those kinds of decisions. They're complicated issues, but I don't think that the guys in Salem know how to make them, that's for sure. So let us make those decisions. But that means we will be held accountable. There probably will be a new compact between the Oregon University system and the state, and between us and the Oregon University system, that will have kind of all these measures in it. The single one where we look bad and where we got a real problem is in retention and graduation rate. And you can argue all you will about the peculiar nature of our students and about the challenge that people have, but I have said this before, we are not so different from a whole lot of other urban universities that manage to have retention and graduation rates about 10 points higher than we do. Ours is 34%. We should be up well beyond the 40%, 45% rate. And if we do not get there within the next few years, I think we frankly will face a world of trouble. As you know, we have put a great number of things in place to try to address this. We have now mandatory advising. We have hired, or in the process of hiring, 14 new advisors in all the different colleges and departments to help our students make their way through the maze. We have enforced our admission standards. We haven't changed our admission standards, we've just begun to enforce them. Instead of having hundreds of students that didn't meet the admission standards and that we let in under some kind of a waiver and who then flunked out, surprisingly, in great numbers, we are now taking our own admission standards seriously. And as you know, we've had very gradual increases in our freshman retention rate, but we got to start getting increases in whole percentage points rather than just stuff measured after the decimal point, because we won't ever get there at that rate. One big part of student retention and student success is to focus on culturally specific groups. Last year, we had the task force on Latino and Latina student success. A particularly important group, because as you know, right now, Portland State, about 5% of the student body is Latino. In the city of Portland, about 10% of the population is Latino. In the public schools of Multnomah County, about 20% of the student body is Latino, and in the lower grades, it's about 30%. If we do not get our act together on doing a really great job getting that group to college and then getting them through and out, we will be not meeting our own moral obligation, our mission of serving this region, but we will also be hurting ourselves, of course, economically, culturally, and every other way, because these are the wage earners and producers, the entrance in the workforce of the future. We had a wonderful task force chaired by Carlos Crespo. We were having an official unveiling of it in early October. We hope to get a lot of visibility and publicity to that. The key recommendations of the task force were to, A, increase outreach to middle schools, especially for Latino students. We actually find in the Latino families, there's a lot of commitment to higher education, but in fact, in the older generation, very little experience with it. So you need to really talk people through it much more than with others. To increase the percentage of Latino faculty and staff, increase scholarships and other financial aid, and create a Latino cultural and student support center. And I've asked our facility staff to make sure we have that up and running well before the end of this academic year, and we're working on all those other aspects as well. One of the people who'll be helping us with this, as well as with 10,000 other things, is our new Chief Diversity Officer, Hilma Meneses. Would you please stand, Hilma? Hilma joins us. She was from Oregon Health and Science University, where she was the Director of Risk Management. Before that, she was Director of Affirmative Action. And before that, she was the Director of Affirmative Action for TriMed. So she has a long experience, and already in the 3 weeks that she's been here now, she's begun to reach out and create contacts. She's creating really a brand new job that will work with all of us, faculty, students, staff, to both increase awareness of diversity, think about its inclusion in the curriculum, think about it in hiring, but also in all of our other practices, and I'm thrilled to have you here, Hilma. Another new person, since I'm on new people anyway, is in the area of research. Let me just ask Jonathan Fink to stand. John? Our new Vice President for Research and Strategic Partnerships. Remember, that was a very important part to it, that because I think so much of our growth in research will come from the partnerships that we create, both with organizations in the Portland metropolitan area, businesses, governments, and others, in the partnerships we create, of course, with other universities, because that's where the big money is. And John will be focusing on the big money. He comes to us from Arizona State University, where he held that role of Vice President for Research, working with Michael Crow, probably one of the success stories of a public urban university that's had tremendously large growth. He's got a great background in sustainability as well. As his discipline, he's a volcanologist, and he actually did a lot of his research here in the Cascades. So I don't know whether Scott Burns is here, but I'm just very glad that we now have somebody else who can work with Scott in determining where the volcanic soil is best for the growth of Pinot Noir grapes. You can never have enough people with that expertise. We've been doing very well in research. As you know, we've gone from $40 million in externally funded research 2 years ago to then $52 million, and now to this past year to $58 million. We have a goal of $64 million for the year that just started. I want to particularly congratulate several of our colleagues on what's probably the largest, or one of the largest, federal grants we've received, maybe other than the transportation one, which was a little different. We got a $3 million NSF grant called the IGERT grant, which is the Integrated Graduate Education and Research Traineeship in the area of environmental studies and providing money for the training of doctoral students. So congratulations to colleagues in primarily environmental sciences, working with people in business and in urban and public affairs. $3 million is pretty good money these days. Now, obviously, we have been focusing on several overarching areas. One that you know of, and that this grant speaks to for sure, is sustainability. And here, too, we have a new person, Bob Costanza. Bob, would you please stand? Bob joins us from the Gund Institute at the University of Vermont, and before that he was at my old stomping grounds, the University of Maryland, at the Center for Environmental Studies there. And he brings to us a wealth of expertise as an ecological economist, a nationwide and indeed a worldwide reputation. And what I really like and really glad about is that he immediately changed the name of the Center for Sustainable Processes and Practices, which nobody could ever remember either, to the Center for Sustainable Solutions. That actually kind of makes sense, doesn't it? He's the editor of the Journal for Sustainable Solutions. They will be undertaking a lot of new activities to raise the profile of PSU in the area of sustainability. Of course, one of our lead areas that overarches everything we do. A second area that overarches many things that we do is the area of education. We have this past year begun to both look at what we can do with the region and what we can do internally. One of the things that struck me when I first came, that I couldn't quite see the K through 12 focus, even though I knew there were a lot of projects. We've been working very closely with the Leaders Roundtable, which is a coalition of superintendents and business leaders and politicians in Multnomah County, the Mayor's Education Cabinet, and others under the leadership of Dean Hitz, is Randy here, and Pat Burke. And PSU has really put itself in a leadership role for reform efforts for K through 12 education in Multnomah County. The model that we're following is based on something that was first implemented in Cincinnati called the STRIVE model, and it very much looks at education as this pipeline, from birth all the way to career. It's called cradle to career, is what we call it. PSU will be providing the research piece to that. The Portland Schools Foundation will be doing a lot of the organizing on the ground to bring together educators, service providers, and others to hold people accountable to key measures of achievement, key metrics of achievements all along that pipeline. And the experience in Cincinnati showed that once you start doing that and you bring people together to talk about how to be successful in terms of making kids ready to read at preschool, being able to read at grade level by 3rd grade, being able to do algebra by 6th grade, and all along that line, that you begin to, with the evidence, drive out bad practice and promote good practices. And the funders are enthused about it. Indeed, in Cincinnati, it has led to very real, measurable increases in performance. Along with that effort in Multnomah County, we will continue a whole range of efforts that we have, primarily around the STEM disciplines, with other school districts as well. And this coming year, we will be reaching out to faculty throughout the institution to increase the effort. It's obviously people from education, engineering, class, but we love to have others involved as well. Clearly, all these issues there's a huge role for fine and performing arts, for social work, for business, to really focus on this, because if K through 12 doesn't do its job, we cannot do our job. So I've talked in terms of overarching intellectual initiatives about sustainability, about education, K through 12, and the third one that we really need to talk about for a bit is related to health and health professions. This past year, we've had a task force jointly between PSU and OHSU to further advance and systematize our collaboration. It was driven, admittedly, by the desire from Representative Greenlick to make the two institutions merge. We will once again come back with a recommendation that we think the cost of merger are high, and unless there is significant new money to both simply pay for that cost of merging two institutions, but also incentivizing people to actually create this as a great new institution, that is just not realistic. And let me assure you, there will be no new money in the next legislative session. But however, there are huge opportunities to enhance the strategic alliances that we already have and to build on them. In the area of research, we already are doing a lot of things jointly, a lot of opportunities for commercialization in the whole health field, work with our incubator, getting OHSU more involved in that. As you know, we already have at least some joint appointments in the sciences. We will be housed, our biology and chemistry departments, down in the life sciences building. That will be both a physical manifestation of the collaboration. We will have departments there. OHSU will be down there. OSU will have its School of Pharmacy there. And I think there are many opportunities for administrative collaboration as well around issues like IT, security, environmental health and safety, purchasing, and so on. In addition, I think there are new growth opportunities on the academic side related to the possibility of School of Public Health, related to the allied health professions, and so I expect a lot of activity in this area in the years to come. In general, the OHSU partnership is perhaps only the most elaborated strategic partnership that we have, but we have others. A very big one is the one with PGE, Portland General Electric, where we have been focusing on electrical vehicles and sustainable green building design. The electrical vehicle thing has turned out to be a lot of fun. For some reason, the Urban Plaza has become the favorite place in the nation for the introduction of electrical vehicles. We've had Toyota there, we've had Ford there, we'll have Nissan there. I get to test drive all of these things. And we right now actually have 10 plug-in Toyota Prius cars. And some of you have been driving them, and otherwise talk to George Beard. He can get you one, a loaner for a little bit. And you know, these have a fairly short range, but then they switch to gas, so you don't get stuck, as opposed to the all-electric vehicles, where you get this range anxiety thing. So those aren't as fun. But that's a very important partnership for a field that is very promising. And again, this is not just fun. We have faculty doing research both on things like battery technology and on behavioral aspects of using these cars. We have a very strong partnership, of course, with Intel. I don't know how many of you saw the wonderful article in the Oregonian about 2 weeks ago about the research reported to them. And of course, they continue to send new cohorts of Vietnamese students to get their engineering degree here. And they've been very supportive on a whole bunch of other ways. We're just starting to work with Oregon Iron Works, which builds the streetcars, to do testing for them. We just created a new partnership, a new task force with the Portland Art Museum. Not a very large organization, but of course a very visible one, and where we hope to move to providing more of our students access to the Art Museum and basically build a membership in as part of being a student at PSU. And the final one, I think we're talking about a possible partnership with Regions Health Insurance. And again, there may be others down the future. A lot of opportunities here. Another form of partnership is with the city, of course. Besides the thing I already mentioned, the city of Portland is very critical to us in terms of accommodating and supporting our expansion plans. We think that right now we are capable of growing to about 36,000 students, given where we are located. You know, we're going to be close to 30,000 this fall. We hired Sasaki, which is an urban planning firm from Boston, and Sarah Architects, who are local, to do a framework plan for us to see how we could accommodate 36,000 students. And we pretty much can do that, building some buildings where there aren't any now, expanding some buildings, acquiring some buildings along the edges of the campus. But it will involve expanding the university district some, which gives us urban renewal money to pay for some of these things. It involves, of course, the life sciences building. So this is a very important partnership because I very much believe that as long as this region is growing, we have to grow with it. We just have to make sure we manage that growth as well as possible. Another part of that framework plan is to make very clear to the city and to everybody else how important we are to the economic future of this region. So we have made it a point to look at the economic development plan that the Portland Development Commission created. They identified target industries there that they see as critical to the future of the region. And we've been able to match that with degree programs and research programs that we have, and we just want to make sure that we now get everybody in those industries talking to our faculty and students in those fields. You know, this is not something we have to sort of create whole new things for. We're already doing it, but let's make it more visible and more explicit so that it becomes, you know, something that people really know about PSU. Now, all of these activities, of course, need to be supported from a variety of ways, but they also create new opportunities for support. You know, some of this highly visible stuff and working with companies obviously increases our ability to access private funding. And given what's happening with the state, and given that, you know, you can only keep raising tuition so long until the students just can't afford to come anymore, private support will get more and more important. And that's where I'm very pleased to be able to introduce yet another new person, Françoise Elmer, over here. Françoise. Françoise joins us most recently from California State San Bernardino, where she was the vice president for university advancement. Before that, she was at the University of Texas, El Paso. Before that, she was in business in Boston. And before that, she was from Paris, France. It is not a requirement to be born abroad to be hired by me, but it clearly doesn't hurt either. I continue to be very optimistic about Portland State's opportunities for fundraising because, you know, we can really put a lot of things in place. We have this growing number of alumni in increasingly important positions, and I know that with the right management, the right leadership, putting the right systems in place, the foundation has become much more focused on really not just being a manager and a steward of the money, but really being proactive about fundraising with us. So I think that over the next 5 years, we will be conducting a capital campaign. And, you know, if the economy, you know, gives us a little bit of a helping hand, I think we will be making major strides in this area. Now, admittedly, none of that is going to help us, you know, this year or next year, but in the long run, that is going to be very beneficial and very productive for us. Let me just conclude, because I know you all think that there's going to be beer and wine out there. But it's not there till 10 after 4 anyway, so no hurry. Nationwide, obviously, there's a great deal of concern at the moment about really the state of the country, the state of the economy. And that is going to be felt in every organization, in every sector of the world. Higher education will more and more be expected to be accountable, to show that we're spending the money well, that we're producing not just credit hours, but that we actually get students out with a degree and that those students are employable. Just look at what's been happening to the private for-profit schools, which have been so under the gun from Congress about, hey, your students don't come out and then get degrees. That's why they're running all these big one-page ads right now about how wonderful they are. But we will be held to those same kind of standards. So we have to be prepared to show that we are indeed performing, that we are contributing to economic development. So if you hear me talk about those things a lot, it isn't because I do not value the quest for knowledge, beauty, and truth for its own sake, but because we also have to be realistic about what the public is expecting from us, and we have to show how that quest for beauty, truth, and knowledge ultimately contributes to making people productive citizens who can contribute to economic growth. And again, I think that with all the accountability stuff that comes down, PSU is actually in very good shape and far better shape than many universities because we've always been deeply engaged with the issues that confront our metropolitan area. We don't have to make that up with one or two cases. We're doing it all the time in education, in sustainability, in engineering, in business, and so on, in the arts. So our key obstacle really to me is that retention problem, that if we do not get our arms around that, we are very, very vulnerable. So I will be hammering on that a lot. But I continue to be extremely optimistic, particularly about this part of the country and this city. Earlier this year, there was a wonderful presentation organized by our Center for Real Estate in the School of Business, where I listened to Leanne Lockman, who's an analyst for the Urban Land Institute, sort of the major real estate development association in the world. And she gave this fascinating presentation about, if you just look at demographics, what is happening in different parts of the world. And it kind of shows that Europe, which I've obviously got a soft spot for, but Europe is this stagnant population. Things are not going well generally, and if your population doesn't grow, it's very hard to have anything else grow. Plus, as you know, they have a lot of tensions around the integration of new populations. Japan, very much an aging population. Indeed, they're trying to cope with a declining population. There are not a lot of societies that have managed to do that gracefully and successfully. Even China, which is a story that everybody talks about, but remember, they've had a one-child policy for a very, very long time. And you know what happens when you only have one child per couple? Pretty soon the population stops growing and is beginning to decline, and indeed it's going to get much older. That is happening. There are, a certain number of the parts of the world, the Middle East, other parts of South Asia, more than any other part of the world, the United States, Arizona notwithstanding, is generally good at welcoming and integrating foreigners and immigrants. So we will continue to attract the present company excluded, the best and the brightest from all over the world. We will continue to grow, and that will give us opportunities that are just far better than trying to cope with stagnation and decline. So that's why I'm very optimistic, and I'm very committed to this. Alice and I continue to have a wonderful time in Oregon. We spent time in the Wallowas this summer. We camped on the shores of the Imnaha River, and I got to admit, it was a real point of pride for me when 3 weeks ago I was talking to Governor Kulongoski, and we were talking about our vacation. Now, he loves that part of the country. He loves Baker City. So he asked me, well, where did you camp? So I sent him an email with the information on it. And I felt pretty good after only having been here 2 years to be able to tell the governor where he should go camping. then just this morning, I ran into him, and he told me, yeah, we went there. It was the best. It was the best camping spot in all of Oregon. So it's pretty good. Unfortunately, he's the outgoing governor. But as I said, we remain very committed. And if you don't believe that, check out that picture that has Roy and Donna on it, looking just absolutely splendid in their Western wear, and Alice and me in our Western wear. You know, to get Alice to wear a, neck to toes green pioneer woman dress. Somebody said today, honey, where was her pitchfork? Me dressed in my cowboy wear. We had a wonderful time there, and I want to say, is Cornell here? Okay, good. Cornell, good. Because before we had to do that dress, now the other part of that visit was, by the way, we had a parade in Pendleton on Friday, and then the highlight of that visit was that Cornell was kind enough to grace us with a traditional drumming song. And I've asked Cornell, would you come up please, to perform a different one, but a song like that in conclusion of my remarks here. Cornell.